You're drunk. Sit down and don't embarrass yourself. It was said softly, almost lazily, like the remark of a man who'd long ago stopped needing to raise his voice to be heard. But when the big man's fist met the old man's jaw and the 73-year-old's body hit the concrete floor of Dixie's barbecue shack, silence fell so fast it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Dixie's was the kind of place where nothing much changed. The walls were lined with old photos of bass fishing tournaments, high school football teams from the 80s, and faded newspaper clippings about county fairs. You could smell hickory smoke in the parking lot before you even reached the door. On Friday nights, regulars sat in their spots without thinking about it, because the same people had been in those spots for decades. Henry McCall was one of them. Third booth from the left, back against the wall, black coffee steaming in front of him no matter the season. He was leaner now than the man in the framed photo over the counter, a young Marine in jungle fatigues holding an M16 somewhere deep in the Vietnamese highlands. But his shoulders still squared naturally, his eyes still had that watchful edge. The limp was more noticeable these days. His flannel shirt was frayed at the cuffs, the faded olive-drab USMC cap pulled low on his forehead. He never asked for special treatment, never brought up the war unless someone else did first. Most folks respected that. But not the 6 who walked in that night. They arrived like a weather front, noise, heat, and the sharp stink of beer long since overtaken by whiskey. Black leather vests patched with crude slogans, boots that thudded heavy against the worn hardwood floor. They laughed like they wanted everyone to hear them, like the world was a bar they already owned. The biggest of them, shirtless under his cut, skin like old saddle leather, spotted Henry immediately. His gaze locked on the USMC cap. "Look at that," he said loudly, jerking a thumb toward Henry. "Bet Grandpa here shot farmers and called it patriotism." A couple of locals shifted uncomfortably, but nobody spoke up. You didn't tell a man that size to shut his mouth unless you had a death wish or a backup plan. Henry lifted his eyes from his coffee. No flinch, no smile, just that calm, measured stare. "You're drunk. Sit down and don't embarrass yourself." It was the kind of answer that should have ended things, firm but not baiting. But this man wasn't looking for an end. He wanted a show. He strode up to Henry's booth, his shadow blotting out the neon glow from the beer sign. "You calling me a liar, old man?" Henry didn't answer, and that was enough. The punch came quick and full of weight, slamming into Henry's jaw and sending him tumbling sideways. His head clipped the table leg on the way down. Coffee spilled, chairs scraped. The room froze. The only sound was the clink of the biker's ring hitting the floor. Henry lay there, stunned, a thin line of blood trickling down his cheek. The big man grinned like he'd just proven a point.
Most people just stared. One or two muttered about calling the cops, but no one moved. The bikers had that effect. Years of violence telegraphed in every tattoo, every scar, every casual grin. In the far booth, a man in a weathered ball cap and a plaid shirt stopped eating. His hands shook as he reached into his pocket, but it wasn't fear that made them shake. It was age. Eli Walker, 74, Navy vet, eyes gone a little cloudy but still sharp enough when it mattered. He flipped open an old phone so scratched it looked like it had survived a few deployments. His thumb tapped 3 words into a saved contact. Echo Charlie 1. Trouble. 20 minutes. Snap. The phone closed. Eli looked up at the biker still looming over Henry. "You picked the wrong night." One of the younger bikers smirked. "What's that, Grandpa? You texting your grandkids to come save you?" Eli didn't answer. He was already crouched next to Henry, one hand steadying the man as he tried to sit up. "Just hold on," Eli murmured. "Help's coming." 19 minutes later, the low rumble started. Not the throaty growl of Harley's, but something heavier, more deliberate. Headlights swept through the dusty windows. First one set, then three more. A matte black Humvee rolled into view, followed by two dark SUVs with government plates. The last vehicle was a white medical van stamped with the Department of Veterans Affairs. They pulled in tight, engines idling, forming a perimeter in the gravel lot like it was second nature. The door to Dixie's slammed open. A man stepped in wearing a desert camo uniform so crisp it looked like it belonged in a recruiting poster. Major Cole Ramirez, square jaw, eyes scanning like radar. Behind him, 6 others fanned out, some in full camo with ranger tabs, others in medical fatigues. Every movement was efficient, coordinated, without wasted energy. Ramirez spotted Eli and Henry instantly. "Sir, you all right?" he asked. The big biker stepped forward. "You got no business here, soldier." Ramirez's smile was cold. "You just hit Sergeant McCall, 3rd Recon, 2 Purple Hearts, Bronze Star. That makes it our business." The air inside Dixie's changed in an instant. That low-grade hum of beer glasses and nervous whispers evaporated, replaced by something sharp, electric. You could feel the shift like the moment before a summer thunderstorm breaks open. The big biker blinked at Ramirez, still wearing that half grin people get when they think they're holding the upper hand. 2 Purple Hearts, he scoffed. "So what? I don't care what the old man did 50 years ago." Ramirez didn't flinch. "You will." The soldiers behind him moved farther into the bar, not fast, not threatening, just deliberate. 2 took positions near the door, boots planted wide, eyes forward. Another leaned against the counter like he was ordering a drink, but his gaze never left the bikers. The medics were already unpacking gear at an empty table, checking gauze and pen lights. A couple of the locals, men who'd been nursing beers for hours, pushed back from their stools and quietly left, giving wide berth to the soldiers. The waitresses froze mid-step. Even the jukebox, mid-song, seemed quieter.
Eli helped Henry back into the booth. Henry's breathing was steady, but his hand stayed pressed to the napkin at his temple. "You didn't have to call them," he muttered. Eli gave a half smile. Didn't have to. Wanted to. The biggest biker shifted his weight. "This your rescue party? A bunch of—" He stopped when the next wave came through the door. First, 2 more soldiers, both with Special Forces tabs, ducked under the frame, scanning the room without moving their heads much. Then came 4 Marines in dress blues, ribbons neat, shoes shining like glass. Behind them, a pair of Air Force pararescue jumpers. The uniforms were different, but the bearing was the same. And suddenly, the bar felt full. Not shoulder to shoulder crowded, but full in the way a small room feels when too many people inside could each handle a dozen of you without breaking a sweat. Ramirez took a step closer to the biker, voice low enough that only the front tables could hear. "Sergeant McCall is family to half the base up the road. You put hands on him, you put hands on all of us." One of the camo-clad soldiers unzipped a pouch on his vest. "We've got the whole thing on video. Every word, every hit." He clipped a small body cam to the table where it caught the biker's face dead on. 2 choices: apologize, pay his medical, and spend the weekend volunteering at the VA, or we send this to the sheriff and the base commander. The biker's friends shifted uneasily. A couple glanced at the door, weighing whether to run for it. They didn't make it far. A Marine in dress blues, mid-30s, solid as a brick wall, simply stepped into their path. He didn't touch them, didn't even raise a hand. He just looked, and that was enough. They backed up, muttering under their breath. Henry, watching from the booth, adjusted the napkin at his head and finally spoke. "Every old man you ignore or mock is someone important. You just don't know it yet." That landed heavier than anything Ramirez had said. Even the soldiers were quiet for a beat. The big biker's grin was gone now. His gaze bounced from the soldiers at the door to the camera on the table, then back to Ramirez. "Fine," he muttered. "I'm sorry." "Say it to him." The biker turned stiffly toward Henry. "Sorry, man. Didn't know you were someone." "I am someone. So's every man in this room. Remember that." The biker gave a jerky nod and stepped back, shoulders slumping as if he'd just realized how outnumbered he really was. Not by sheer bodies, but by people who lived by a different code than he had ever known. One of the medics approached Henry with a small flashlight. "Mind if I check your eyes, sir?" Henry sighed, but tilted his head. "You people don't take no for an answer, do you?" "No, sir, we don't." Across the bar, Eli leaned back in his booth, letting the tension drain out of his shoulders. He'd seen this before, more times than he could count. Not just the arrival of reinforcements, but the way they filled in around someone who'd taken a hit, the way they closed ranks, physically and morally, without needing to be told.
Ramirez turned to Eli. "Last time you called in, it was for that wreck on 214. Eli chuckled. "Yeah, you brought 2 Humvees and a Blackhawk for a fender bender. Never know when a fender bender is going to turn into something else. Better to show up big." The soldiers began to move more loosely now, their initial perimeter softening as it became clear the bikers weren't looking for a second round. One medic started wiping down the floor where Henry's coffee had spilled, as casually as if it were his own home. The big biker stood near the bar, hands in his vest pockets, eyes fixed on the floor. Every so often he'd glance toward the door like he wanted to leave, but something about the mood in the room kept him rooted, like leaving too soon would be taken as cowardice. Finally, Ramirez nodded toward the lot. "You're free to go, but you'll be hearing from us about that VA shift." The bikers swallowed, nodded once, and moved toward the door. His crew followed, heads down. Outside, the convoy engines rumbled quietly, waiting. Inside, the tension had shifted into something else entirely. Not relief exactly, but recognition. The kind that passes between people who've seen the same storms. Henry leaned back in his booth, pressing the napkin a little harder against his temple. "I don't suppose you brought any better coffee with you," he said. Ramirez's face cracked into the faintest grin. "We'll see what we can do." The soldiers didn't just stand guard. They settled in, as if reclaiming the space. One Marine leaned on the jukebox, flipping through old country tunes. A ranger ordered 2 plates of brisket and slid one to Eli without a word. The medics finished checking Henry, then pulled a chair to his booth like they weren't leaving anytime soon. It stopped feeling like a standoff and started feeling like a gathering. The locals sensed it too. Shoulders relaxed, conversations picked back up, quieter, more respectful now. Major Ramirez called the bar's attention with just his voice. "Folks, this is Sergeant Henry McCall, 3rd Recon Battalion, USMC. Wounded twice in combat, Bronze Star recipient. He's more than a customer here. He's one of the reasons we get to have places like this." Every soldier in the room snapped to attention and saluted. The sound of boots hitting the floor in unison cut through the air like a bell. A couple of the regulars, unsure what else to do, stood up too. Henry, still seated, blinked at the formation in front of him. "You didn't have to do this," he said quietly. Ramirez shook his head. "You earned this decades ago. We're just late delivering." Even the bartender, who'd been frozen in place since the first Humvee arrived, raised a glass. "To Henry," he said. And for the first time that night, Henry smiled. The salute held for several seconds before Ramirez gave the nod to stand down. Soldiers relaxed, but they didn't scatter. They stayed close, by habit, by choice, as if leaving Henry alone again would be wrong. One young corporal, barely out of boot, slid into the booth across from Eli. "Sir," he asked, "what was the Mekong like in '68? My granddad used to talk about it, but never much detail." Eli chuckled. "Wet, hot, and a whole lot farther from Georgia than any of us wanted to be. His eyes softened. But we had each other. That's what mattered. At the next table, a medic wrapped Henry's head in fresh gauze. Mild concussion, but you're good to go. We'll have the VA van take you home. Henry nodded his thanks. You boys didn't have to make a fuss. Ramirez overheard, leaned in. Yeah, we did. That's the thing about a brotherhood. You don't get to decide when it ends. The room had shifted completely now. Where there'd been fear, there was warmth. Where there'd been distance, there was connection. Even the regulars who hadn't spoken to Henry in years were stopping by, shaking his hand, asking about his service. At the bar, a young waitress was showing two Marines a faded Polaroid of her grandfather in uniform. One of the soldiers pointed to a patch on the man's shoulder and smiled knowingly. Stories began to flow about deployments, about homecomings, about the people left waiting back here. Outside, the convoy's lights still cut across the gravel lot. The bikers were loading into their trucks, heads low, their bravado stripped clean. They didn't look back. Ramirez eventually stood to leave, but before he did, he walked to Eli's booth. "Text still works," he said with a grin. Eli tapped his pocket. "That was the last one I had saved." Ramirez pulled a folded slip of paper from his uniform and slid it across the table. "Here's a new number. You ever need us again, just say the word." Eli tucked it into his wallet without a word. Then he turned to Henry. "Same table next week?" Henry smirked, the swelling around his jaw pulling slightly. "Only if they bring better coffee." A ripple of laughter ran through the soldiers nearby. The medics escorted Henry to the VA van, while Ramirez stepped outside to speak quietly with the convoy drivers. The Humvee's engine rumbled low, almost like a heartbeat in the night. The soldiers left the bar the same way they had arrived, deliberate, orderly, a moving wall of quiet professionalism. When the last of them stepped out, the door swung shut behind them, and Dixie's seemed to exhale. Inside, the conversation slowly returned to talk of weather and fishing, but it wasn't the same. The air felt different. People glanced at Henry's empty booth like it meant more now. The bartender wiped down the counter, then paused, looking toward Eli. "Never seen anything like that in here before." Eli just shrugged. "That's because you don't usually see it, but it's always there." Hours later, when the last customer had gone, the waitress found something on Henry's table, his coffee mug still half full, and a folded napkin under it. On the napkin, in blocky handwriting, was a single line. "Some debts aren't measured in dollars."
She didn't throw it away. She tucked it into the cash register, right beside the photo of her own father in uniform. Down Route 27, the convoy merged into the dark, their tail lights shrinking until they disappeared entirely. No sirens, no headlines, no news crews waiting at the end. Just the quiet return to wherever they'd come from, carrying the same resolve they'd walked in with. In the VA van, Henry stared out the window at the passing pines. His reflection in the glass was older, slower, but behind the bruises and bandage, he could still see the young Marine who'd walked point in the Highlands half a lifetime ago. "You okay back there?" the medic driving asked. Henry gave a small nod. "Better than I was an hour ago." The medic smiled. "Good. You're not just in the Corps, Sergeant. You are the Corps, and we take care of our own." Henry didn't answer. He didn't need to. Back at Dixie's, the waitress flipped the sign to closed and locked the door. For a long moment, she stood in the quiet, staring at Henry's booth. She thought about the way the soldiers had looked at him, about the way strangers had saluted like they'd known him all their lives. She realized something then, that respect like that isn't born in the moment. It's earned over years, through choices made in places most people will never see. And sometimes it takes the arrival of an entire convoy to remind the world of that fact. When Henry got home that night, he set his cap on the kitchen table, poured himself a fresh cup of coffee, and sat in the dark, listening to the quiet. The bruise on his jaw would fade. The limp would stay. But so would the knowledge that even in the middle of a nowhere roadside bar, the Brotherhood was still out there, ready to show up 20 minutes flat, no questions asked. The battle was over. The night was still. And somewhere on a slip of paper in Eli's wallet was a promise. Not every war is fought overseas. Some are fought in moments of silence, in the spaces between insults and the hands that reach down to pull you back up. And when they come for you, not in anger, but in loyalty, you remember. You remember who you are, and you remember you were never alone.